Anyways, Nietzsche thought we would have to create our own values to replace those that would fall because of the death of Christianity. And the psychoanalysts, Freud and Jung, particularly Jung, but Freud began it, I think, and Jung made this explicit, I think, found a fatal flaw in Nietzsche's theorizing. And maybe it's a fatal flaw in relationship to modernism per se, even to the idea of rational thought itself as master of its own house. You can't make your own values. Like, you can aim, you can direct your life, you can cooperate in determining the values that you pursue, but you cooperate with forces in yourself that aren't you and can't be made you, not in any straightforward way. And it's easy to understand this if you think about, for example, the fact that if you do something that you shouldn't do, or if you don't do something that you should do, that you'll lay awake in bed at night and torment yourself about it and worry about it and consider yourself an unworthy person, as if you believed in the idea of sin. It's a very strange thing that there's an ethic that calls to you from within that you can't control, that holds you responsible for your actions. And that's just one of many subpersonalities in some sense that are operative within people. I mean, it depends, I suppose, on how integrated their personality is. The less integrated people are more different depending on what emotional state they're in. But the you that's overwhelmed with grief, or the you that's overwhelmed with love or lust, or the you that's overwhelmed with anger, possessed by those things, is really often by no means the same you that you like to think of yourself as when you're under full conscious control and in your normal state of mind. I mean, even the idea of drunkenness, intoxication, that's possession by a spirit, right? That's why whiskey is a spirit. It's the spirit of Dionysius. And you drink and you become something that you normally aren't. They say in vino veritas, but it's not necessarily reasonable to believe that everything you do and say while you're intoxicated by alcohol is true. The point is that there are multiple personalities at work within you, and they have a fair bit of autonomy, like a strange autonomy. If you could just create your own values, you could imagine, in some sense, you'd be doing what Raskolnikov tried to do in Crime and Punishment, which is a book I'd really recommend. So he believed that Nietzschean idea that you could create your own values. And as a consequence, he decided to murder a terrible old woman who was oppressing many of the people in her neighborhood and seemed loved by no one and hated by everyone, and who was a vicious slave master to her not very bright niece. And Raskolnikov thought that he could do away with her, that would get him out of some financial trouble, and then he would do good things with the money. And that if he was a real Superman in some sense, in the Nietzschean manner of thinking, that he could just dispense with all the guilt that might logically be associated with murder, because after all, if there's no God, everything is permitted and we can create our own values. And Crime and Punishment is an unbelievably deep study of what happens when you cross a line that you shouldn't have crossed because of your own arrogance. And so Raskolnikov, this is a thriller, this book, a real detective story. Well, I'm not going to blow the plot, but he's sort of successful in the murder. He gets away with it, although it doesn't exactly turn out the way he expects, even the act itself. But what he discovers in the aftermath of what he did is that he was nowhere near as in control of himself and his personality and his emotional reactions as he thought. And he tortures himself for a very long time with very interesting psychological and social consequences, as well as driving the plot ahead very rapidly with what he's done. Absolute, stark, traumatized disbelief at what he's done. And so what I'd like to ask Nietzsche, because that's the question that I'm supposed to be answering, is, given the mutability of man, the fact that we are composed of multiple subpersonalities, which, by the way, was something that Nietzsche actually mentioned and that I believe that both Freud and Jung relied on when they were formulating their psychoanalytic theories. Given the fact that we aren't masters of our own houses, given the fact that we're divided amongst ourselves, how in the world is it possible for us to develop our own values when we're a mass of internal contradictions, and each of those contradictions is a consequence of something live trying to make its case made? Like if you were your own creation, whatever that might mean, if you were in full control of your own consciousness and emotions and motivations, well, then you certainly wouldn't be guilty about things you didn't do or did do, because you could just revamp your value structure at will to optimize, let's say, your emotional state. And, it's good to some degree to be able to do that, to cheer yourself up and to dampen your grief. But man, you're not as in control of yourself as you'd like to think. And you're haunted by many things that you could be and many things that you are. One of the things that really terrified me, I think, enough to change the way I was living when I was studying psychology, was that encounter with that psychoanalytic idea that you're not alone in your psyche. You can even tell that if you're a student, if you're trying to read something that you have to read. There's a difference between reading something you have to read and something that you want to read. If you want to read it, you can just read it. If you have to read it, you might not read it at all. You might just procrastinate endlessly. Even if there's an important outcome like an exam, even if the consequence of that exam might be failing a course and destroying your academic record, you'll still find yourself very resistant to read the paper unless you happen to be personally interested in it. And that's so interesting too, because even at that level, you're not the sort of person that can create their own values, man. You can't even convince yourself to read a piece of complex writing if you're a university student enrolled in a course that you chose that assignment is part of. And so that's a pretty good indication of just how many directions you're pulled in simultaneously. So I would really like to discuss that with Nietzsche. I would like to know what he thought about that. Maybe he thought that despite our dissociability and the multiplicity of our personality, that the possibility or the necessity of creating our own values was the only chance we had. But what I learned from Jung, and this is probably the most profound thing I learned, I think, of all the things that I know, perhaps, is that values aren't created, they're discovered. And they're discovered through a consultation with the parts of yourself that you're not conscious of, that you're not fully conscious of, that aren't fully articulated elements of your primary personality. You have to discover what your values are. And you're informed about that, well, partly by other people who will object if your values aren't appropriate, but certainly by a dialogue with yourself and with your conscience. That's a very important thing to know. It's part of the reason why I think that you need to tell the truth, because you're forced to negotiate with yourself to operate properly in the world. And if you've warped yourself, let's say, or some elements of yourself by engaging in self-deception and lies, and you're not now, because of that, you're not who you could be, and you don't live in the world as you should live in it, then when you discuss with yourself what your value should be, it will be as if you're discussing it with someone that you can't trust. And that's not good. Like, you can't afford that. Life is difficult and it contains many pitfalls. And unless you're careful and you sort yourself out properly and you aim high and walk on the straight and narrow path, you don't have a hope of understanding where you should be and at what time when the crisis hits. And the crisis will hit. So you want to get all those little subpersonalities in line if you can. It's part of the reason, for example, why Jung thought you had to integrate your shadow, which is the dark part of your character. He thought that was necessary, or it would go and have a little autonomous life of its own, maybe manifesting itself, for example, when you're angry or drunk, instead of integrated into the rest of your personality like a properly disciplined player in a complex and sophisticated game.
Hi folks, thank you for tuning in to Sorting Myself Out. I'm here with my co-host Mercury Black, and we're just going to give you a quick response to the content in this video because we want to generate further discussion, dialogue, and learning. One of the things we've been talking about on this channel a lot is subpersonalities. The whole series that we're currently doing with Dr. Roger Strachan is a deep dive into the subpersonalities, understanding how to work with them and how to individuate, just like Dr. Peterson mentions in this video. One of the things about subpersonalities that I thought Peterson really shone a light on here is if we don't make them conscious and we don't start to explore the different motivations and to admit that they're there and to lean into them a little bit, then they inadvertently start to sneak into our life and grab us into different motivations to push us into areas we might not actually want to go. And so unless we make ourselves more self-aware and individuate and take ownership and responsibility for the different motivations that are pushing and pulling us all over the place, then we tend to be kind of just a feather blowing in the wind of life. We're not grounded and rooted into something deeper and more essential, vibrant, vital. And that's kind of making contact with this conscience that Peterson's talking about. I like to call it the soul, kind of the epicenter, the totality, the deeper self, the higher self. And that's the part of me that can really be my guiding force in life, that can help me guide my subpersonalities and give them each a job. Because all the subpersonalities need a job. If they don't have a job, then they're going to create their own job. They're going to do something whether or not I want them to. So I might as well engage with them. And that's one of the things about Dr. Strachan's model that I really appreciate, is we don't push the subpersonalities away. We embrace them and we use them in a soul-directed manner. And we have that consultation with our conscience that Dr. Peterson's talking about. And out of that grows this beautiful, flowering psyche that really has more control over the life expression and the life path. And we can start to live a life of purpose, a life of vision, a life of synchronicity, a life of being connected, a life of understanding who we are. Mercury, what do you think?
When I look back to the old me, so the version of me that like you never met and that I'm very different from, before I became bipolar, I thought I was one person. I wasn't aware of subpersonalities. Also, before I was bipolar, I thought I lived in the real world. I had no idea of the degree. And I mean, yes, technically I knew some people are colorblind and I can see color, but I never, even that aspect of it, I never fully realized how much I wasn't living in the real world. I was living in a world that I was generating. And I thought of myself as one thing. And I did not notice a lot of my emotions. I did not identify my subpersonalities, was not aware of them. I was trying to turn myself into one person. And I have often, like looking back on it, wondered, if I had been integrated and done the spiritual work that I've done since then, before that accident, would I have gone bipolar or not? But for me, it wasn't that I recognized that I needed to discover my own morals and discover my subpersonalities and integrate and went to do it. It was I completely ignored that until the universe had to just slap me upside the head with a bus. And it all just flooded in. So yeah, I discovered the intense virtue of honesty from my psychosis, which, whether that's a God within me or whether that's a message from God, I found very much that the need to tell the truth was something to be discovered in the universe. The last thing I would have to add is for anyone who's coming across this video and isn't familiar with me and Ryan, just to let you know what we're doing here and who we're inviting to participate in the community. And Who we are inviting is absolutely anybody who is aiming towards the good right now. So I don't care what demographic you're from, where you find yourself politically, where you find yourself when it comes to atheism or a believer. If you are trying to improve yourself, you're looking to discuss things in good faith and honestly, and you're working towards the good, you're welcome here. And the one thing that we're really not interested in is discussions about what's wrong with someone else. So if somebody, and even in my personal life, if somebody comes to me and they're either a right-winger wanting to talk about the problems of the left, or a left-winger wanting to talk about everything wrong with the alt-right, I'm not interested in having that kind of discussion. The only way I'm going to be discussing the shadow side and the light side of right-wing is if I'm talking with someone right-wing. So if you're on the alt-right and you've realized you need to make some changes and you're looking to find what's good and bad in your own beliefs, I'm happy to discuss that with you. On the other hand, if you're looking to have a long discussion about everything wrong with them, that's not where we're going with this. This is about us all working on ourselves as non-judgmentally and compassionately as possible in good faith and honesty.
Well, the other thing that Peterson often talks about is, and that I fully agree with, if you strengthen the individual, they're less vulnerable to ideology. And so, there's two ways to approach things in life. And one is you can take them head on and try to fight the issue. Or the other way is you can help to strengthen the personality, to find a place of authenticity, and then belief systems and proper balance will follow. And so I just am a firm believer that if we focus on human authenticity, connection, personality development, that whatever belief systems need to happen in society and whatever we need to converge on and team up on and collaborate on and whatever we need to do to make humanity a place of peace and prosperity will happen as a result of the focus on the individual. So I think that's perfect for our channel.
Yeah, you said that brilliantly.
Thanks, brother.